The storm rages above, a dark and heavy sky looming over the ranch like a suffocating blanket. The wind howls, and the first raindrops fall, hitting the earth with a sharp, rhythmic thud. In the midst of the storm, standing alone in the corral, is Samson. His once majestic coat is now scarred, his spirit broken, a mere shadow of the powerful warhorse he once was. The light in his eyes is gone, replaced by a cold emptiness, as if time itself has worn him down. A truck crests the hill in the distance, its engine struggling against the wind, as James Harper, a 37-year-old veteran, grips the steering wheel with white knuckles. The years have passed, but the weight of the past hasn't left him. It follows him like a shadow, a constant reminder of the bond he failed to protect. He's back now. Back to face the memories, back to find the one thing he never thought he'd see again. As James steps out of the truck, the rain falls heavier, soaking his clothes in seconds. Each step toward the corral feels like a lifetime. His heart pounds in his chest as he approaches Samson, his former partner, the one who had saved his life more times than he could count. But when James locks eyes with the horse, something sharp pierces through him. The recognition he hoped for isn't there. Samson's gaze is distant, hollow, as if he's staring through James, not at him. The rain beats down harder, the sound of it mixing with the thunder in the distance. The connection they once shared feels like a memory slipping away. Samson doesn't recognize him. James falters for a moment, the weight of the past crashing over him, and he struggles to find his voice. Samson, he whispers, barely audible, his heart heavy with emotions he can't even begin to express. James stands at the fence, his eyes locked on Samson, but the distance between them feels impossible to bridge. His heart aches as he calls out the horse's name again, his voice trembling, hoping for a flicker of recognition. He speaks softly, desperately, "It's me, Samson. It's James." But instead of stepping forward, the horse takes a step back, his eyes cold and distant, retreating further into his own world. The pain in James's chest tightens. He knew it wouldn't be easy, but this emptiness, this rejection, it cuts deeper than he could have prepared for. The bond they shared once felt unbreakable, but now it feels like a thread, fraying and slipping through his fingers. From a distance, Jenny, a young ranch hand, watches quietly, noticing the struggle unfolding before her. She approaches cautiously, her voice soft as she offers an explanation. "He doesn't trust anyone, especially men," she says, her gaze flicking to James before returning to Samson. "Especially veterans." James's face tightens at her words. He knows the truth in them all too well. Samson, like him, carries the weight of the war, the trauma, the scars, the things they both wish they could forget but can't. That unspoken bond they shared on the battlefield, forged in the heat of combat, now feels like a forgotten memory. Flashbacks flood James's mind. Samson charging through gunfire, his hooves pounding the ground as he carried James to safety time and time again. They had been through hell together, side by side. They had fought and survived in ways no one else could understand. But now, here they stood, two survivors, broken by the same war, yet separated by the distance that time and suffering had created. James runs a hand through his hair, feeling the weight of everything they've been through, wondering if that bond could ever be restored. The silence between him and Samson feels like an ocean, deep, cold, and impossible to cross. James stands in the rain, the cold seeped deep into his bones, but it's the weight of the past that really freezes him in place. His eyes never leave Samson, but his mind drifts back to another time, to a place far from this quiet ranch. He's back in the battlefield, the air thick with the sound of deafening gunfire, the ground shaking beneath him, and the heat, sweltering, suffocating heat, all-consuming and relentless. The screams of soldiers, the shouts of orders, and the terrifying wail of incoming fire. And then there was Samson, by his side, always there, charging through the chaos, his hooves pounding the earth, his strength and spirit unwavering. Together, They had faced everything, surviving the worst of it, never giving up, never leaving each other behind. Or so James thought. He lets out a shaky breath, his hands gripping the fence until his knuckles turn white. I should have stayed, he mutters under his breath, his voice barely audible over the rain. I should have stayed, Samson. The guilt weighs heavier than any of the scars on his body. After the war, when the chaos settled and the mission ended, James left. He left the place where so many had fallen. And he left Samson. He didn't know how to face the memories, the trauma they'd both endured. So, he ran. Away from the war, away from the pain, and away from the one creature that had been there through it all. Now, looking at the horse, the guilt that he'd buried so deep within himself resurfaces. I failed you, he whispers, his throat tight. It's the same guilt he's felt about his comrades, his friends, and even himself. He was supposed to protect them all. Yet all he did was run, leaving Samson behind. The memories, the weight of the choices he made, still haunt him, their echoes reverberating in his soul. Samson's silent rejection only amplifies that pain. The way the horse won't even come near him, the emptiness in his eyes. It feels like a confirmation that he's failed the one being who had once given everything for him. And now, James wonders if the bond they shared can ever be repaired. If it's too broken, too buried in the dust of time. If even Samson's instincts, the bond they once had, can survive the weight of all that trauma. The storm rages around them, but the battle within James rages even louder. The morning light casts a dull glow over the ranch as James walks slowly toward the corral. His movements are deliberate, careful, almost as if he's walking into battle again. But this time, the fight is for something deeper, something more personal. He approaches Samson, determined not to let the distance between them grow any further. The rain has stopped, but the air still carries a heaviness, much like the burden James carries in his chest. This time, he knows he needs to be different. He needs to show Samson that he's not just the man who left him behind. He needs to be the man who can help them both heal. With a deep breath, James kneels down in the muddy ground, lowering himself to Samson's level. His heart pounds as he reaches out to the horse, exposing his vulnerability in a way he's never done before. He's not the soldier now, hardened by combat and distance. He's just a man, with the same scars Samson carries, seeking redemption. He stretches out his hand and pulls from his pocket a small, worn piece of leather. It's a part of the tack Samson used during their time together in the military, a small relic of a time when they were more than just man and horse. They were partners, survivors. He holds the leather up to Samson, his voice trembling as he says, "Do you remember this, boy? Do you remember me?" For a moment, their eyes meet, and in that brief, fleeting instant, James swears he sees it, just a flicker of recognition in Samson's eyes. It's subtle, almost imperceptible, but it's there. For a heartbeat, feels like the years, the distance, the trauma all vanish. But just as quickly as it appeared, the recognition fades, leaving Samson's gaze cold and distant once more. James feels his heart sink. The small glimmer of hope that had lit up his chest now feels like a cruel joke. He drops his hand to his side, the leather slipping from his fingers. It's not enough. Nothing seems to be enough. From the edge of the corral, Jenny watches, her expression heavy with understanding. She approaches slowly, her steps cautious as she draws near James. He's been through more than anyone can understand, she says, her voice soft but filled with quiet wisdom. Some things are irreparable. James doesn't respond right away. He can hear the truth in her words, but he refuses to let that be the end of it. He won't give up, not now, not when there's still a chance. You don't understand, he says, his voice low but firm. This bond, it's still there. It's buried deep, but it's still there. I know it is. Jenny watches him, her gaze searching his face, seeing the raw determination in his eyes. She doesn't say anything more, but her concern is palpable. James stands up, wiping his muddy hands on his pants as he looks back at Samson. He knows this won't be easy. He knows the road ahead will be long and filled with obstacles. But for the first time in a long time, he feels the spark of something real, a belief that they can heal together, even if it takes everything he has left. James takes a step back, his heart heavy with understanding. This time, he decides to give Samson the space he needs. No more pushing, no more desperate attempts to force the connection that might not be ready to rekindle. The storm within James has calmed, replaced by a quiet patience, the kind he learned to practice in the face of war. He stands still by the corral, his gaze steady but gentle, letting his presence reach Samson in its own time. The wind blows softly, carrying the scent of the earth and the heavy stillness of the ranch. Minutes pass. James doesn't move. His eyes never leave the horse, but his posture is open, vulnerable. No commands, no words, just his silent presence reaching out to the animal he once trusted with his life. His mind is full of memories, flashbacks to the battlefield, to the moments when they fought side by side. Those memories are raw and painful, but they drive him to stand there, quietly waiting. And then it happens. Slowly, cautiously, Samson's ears flick toward James. It's small, almost unnoticeable, but for James, it feels like a crack in the wall that had stood between them. A brief recognition flickers in the horse's eyes, the faintest sign that he's beginning to remember. He takes a step forward, hesitant but deliberate, as if testing the waters of the bond they once shared. James's heart races in his chest, his breath catching in his throat. It's not much, but it's enough. It's a sign. Samson has begun to trust him again, if only for a fleeting moment. The small step is more than James could have hoped for. It's a victory, a sign that their connection isn't entirely lost. It's a spark of hope, and in that moment, everything else fades away. The years, the guilt, the trauma, they don't matter as much anymore. There's a way forward, and it starts with this small, fragile step. From a distance, Jenny watches the interaction between the man and the horse, her eyes wide with a mix of curiosity and awe. She's never seen Samson react like this to anyone before. The horse, once so distant, now moving with a soft curiosity, an openness that was never there before. Jenny steps back, quietly observing, but a knowing smile plays at the corner of her lips. She doesn't speak, but her thoughts are clear. She sees the shift, the breakthrough. James, still standing silently, feels a wave of relief mixed with the sting of pain. The road ahead is far from easy, but this moment, this small step forward, is enough to remind him that the healing process has begun. The journey won't be quick or simple, but for the first time in a long time, he believes that they can get there together. The evening sky is painted with deep shades of orange and purple as James steps carefully into the pen with Samson. The air is still, but the weight of the past hangs heavy between them. James knows what he has to do. This moment isn't just about reconnecting. It's about confronting everything that they both buried long ago. He moves toward Samson slowly, every step calculated, as if entering a battlefield where the enemy isn't a soldier but something much more personal. They're not just facing the past. They're confronting the scars that it left behind. As he approaches the horse, he's careful not to make any sudden movements. Samson stands, his body rigid, his eyes darting around as if waiting for something. There's a tense stillness in the air, until, without warning, a helicopter roars overhead. The sound cuts through the evening silence, sharp and invasive, and in an instant, the change in Samson is palpable. His body trembles violently, his eyes widen, and he begins to move erratically, his legs stiff with panic. The sound of the helicopter seems to trigger something deep within him. Memories of the war flooding back. The trauma of combat, the deafening roar of helicopters overhead, the chaos. It all rushes back in a wave. Jenny, who's been standing outside the pen, watching, sees the horse's distress and steps forward, concern etched across her face. James, do something, she urges, her voice shaking with the weight of the situation. She doesn't understand the depth of Samson's trauma, the complexity of the bond between the horse and James. but James does. He sees the panic in Samson's eyes, and he knows exactly what it means. He knows that this isn't just a reaction to the sound. It's Samson reliving the horrors of combat. Taking a deep breath, James doesn't rush. He's seen this kind of fear before, and he knows the importance of remaining calm. Slowly, he walks toward Samson, keeping his hands open, not to grab or control, but to offer reassurance. "You're safe now," he murmurs softly, his voice steady and soothing. "It's over, boy. You're safe." Samson hesitates, his body trembling as he stares at James, torn between the instinct to flee and the connection that's been slowly rekindled. For a few agonizing moments, it seems as though Samson might spiral further, but then something changes. His gaze softens ever so slightly, confusion mixing with recognition. It's not full clarity, not yet, but it's enough for James to see the small, fragile shift. Samson's breathing steadies, the frantic energy that had overtaken him begins to subside. James approaches cautiously, taking another step forward. He doesn't force anything. He simply lets the horse find his way back, knowing that this moment, this slow, tentative connection, is something they both need to heal. Jenny watches from the fence, silent now, seeing the quiet change in Samson. She hadn't understood the depth of the bond before, but now, she sees it, how James's presence, his calmness, is exactly what Samson needs. The horse, though still on edge, stands a little taller, his body less tense. His gaze locked on James with a mixture of confusion and trust. This moment is a turning point, but James knows it's just the beginning. The healing will be slow, uncertain, and filled with setbacks, but there's progress. And for the first time in what feels like forever, James dares to believe that they might just make it through the darkness together. The air is thick with anticipation as James stands before Samson, the horse now more settled, but still wary. There's a fragile peace between them, a moment that feels too delicate to disturb. For the first time in years, James feels the warmth and life of the horse beneath his touch. His hand reaches out, trembling slightly, and he gently rests his fingers on Samson's forehead. The sensation is overwhelming. The soft fur, the familiar pulse of the horse's heartbeat beneath his fingertips. It's as if a bridge has been built, not with words, but with this simple, vulnerable gesture. This moment signifies more than just a touch. It's a path to healing, a sign that they are both ready to move forward, together. James allows himself a quiet breath, taking in the weight of what this moment means. It's not a complete restoration of their bond. It's not yet whole. But it's a step, a significant one. And in this moment, that's all that matters. From the fence, Jenny watches in silence, her eyes fixed on the connection between the man and the horse. She can't fully understand the depth of what James and Samson have been through, but she sees the bond that's growing, the trust that's slowly being rebuilt. She's impressed by the quiet strength between them, how James has never given up on the horse, even when it seemed like all hope was lost. After a long pause, James turns to Jenny, his voice heavy with emotion. "He saved my life more times than I can count," he says, his words soft but resolute. "We fought together, side by side, and I promised him I'd never leave him behind." The weight of that promise, the guilt of breaking it for so many years, hangs heavily in the air. James swallows hard, the emotion threatening to spill over, but he holds it back, knowing that this moment, the one with Samson, is a step toward redemption. Jenny doesn't say anything. She doesn't need to. The truth is in James's eyes, in the way he looks at the horse now. For the first time, it's not just about the past, it's about the present and what they can still build together. Then, as if acknowledging the bond between them, Samson takes another small step forward. His movements are slower now, more deliberate, less hesitant. It's a fragile step, but it's a step forward. And for James, it's all the hope he needs. He doesn't push for more. He just stands there, letting the horse take it at his own pace, knowing that healing takes time. As the sun begins to dip below the horizon, casting long shadows across the ranch, James and Samson begin to walk together across the open field. The weight of the past, of the battles fought and the promises broken, doesn't disappear with a single step. But in this shared silence, they both understand that they are no longer prisoners of it. Together, they will face the future, taking it one step at a time, learning to heal and trust again. The path ahead is uncertain, but as they walk side by side, James knows one thing for sure. No matter what happens, they will always have each other. The bond they share, though scarred, is unbreakable, and with each step, it grows stronger. This is the beginning of a new chapter. One where they both learn to move forward, together. If you enjoyed this heartfelt story, don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel for more amazing tales. Your support keeps us going.